traditions among the Qom of Argentina. Next week we'll have Anita Stone from California Lutheran University. She'll talk about squirrel monkeys, so from juveniles to adults, life history, challenges, and strategies of squirrel monkeys living in eastern Amazonia, Brazil. And the week after that is Adrienne Bell, University of Utah, advancing our evolutionary understanding of migration. And then the final week is Peter Gray from UNLV.
Very interesting.
Good. I have Italian heritage, and I think I project. Do I need a microphone?
No.
No. Good. Great. I'm also not a formal speaker at all. And I don't mind being interrupted as many times as you feel fit, so let's make this a dialogue more than anything else, okay? And I'm going to be moving a lot too. I speak with my hands, so you get the point. Transitions. That is the keyword of my career, I think. It took me a while to realize that the common thread of my research program was focusing on different ways of interpreting the term transitions. So for today, I thought I would take you to an account of what we have been doing for the last 20 years in the context of the Chaco Area Reproductive Ecology Project, which we started now 21 years ago, and start to peel the layers of what we mean by understanding the lived experience of these groups as they transition to a different lifestyle, but also as they go through life themselves as individuals. So this is what I'm gonna try to discuss with you, and I hope to get a lot of feedback on what are aspects I need to consider and we need to work on, and from your expert experience. I'm very happy to be here, and I thank you all for coming to my presentation. First of all, what is the Gran Chaco? It's not a very well-known area in the sense that it's not as publicized as the Amazon or the Argentinian Pampas. It lies in between those two regions. It occupies a large portion of this beautiful biome in between the Amazon and the Pampas and Patagonia. Is very biodiverse, but it's also ethnically very diverse. And it's a privilege for me to be able to work with some of the communities that live there. We started working in the Gran Chaco in 1996, and the idea was to try to understand how different environmental factors interacted with reproductive physiology to see in a more reproductive ecology perspective what was going on. The Gran Chaco area has many different ethnic groups that come from very subtropical areas all the way to very arid and desertic areas. Depending on who you read, you may have more than 30 different indigenous groups. I have been working mainly with two of them, the Toba or Qom and the Wichi of the Gran Chaco area. I'm going to be referring to them as Qom now, because for the last, I would say, 5 years, there is a strong movement coming from the community itself to change their name. Toba was the term other indigenous groups used to refer to them, and it means in Guarani, big front, big forehead. Mm-hmm. So because they used to shave the first few centimeters of their hairline, and so they look as to have a very large forehead. So that's why they say, you know what, that doesn't represent us. We call them ourselves Qom, and that's what we prefer to be called from now on. So I'm starting to switch to Qom now. And I'm very privileged because I am in this situation where I can work with different communities all along the area, that are in this spectrum of market integration or acculturation, whatever you want to call it. So we have groups that live in remote areas that are still relying on hunting and gathering and fishing for their subsistence, and they live semi-nomadically. Those are located closer to the border with Paraguay, all the way to urban barrios in different cities in Argentina, all the way down to Buenos Aires. There's a Qom barrio in the city of La Plata. So we have the opportunity to walk with them along this spectrum and see what are the consequences of this transition to a very dramatic and fast change in lifestyle, from a sociocultural perspective, from a demographic perspective, and an epidemiological perspective. So the two main areas, or the two main field sites we have, one is located in the outskirts of the city of Formosa, which is the capital city of the province of Formosa, in the border with Paraguay, and the other one is in a more remote area in the border with Paraguay and with the province of Salta. And usually people put this slide at the end, which I think is very unfair. I wouldn't be able to say a word of what I'm going to be telling you about without these people. And I thank all of them for providing their participation in the study, for being patient, and for interacting with the community in a caring way. And I also want to introduce you to Melanie Martin. Many of you know Melanie. And she's now my co-PI in the CARE project, and I'm very fortunate to have her company in this enterprise. She's currently my postdoc, but she has just been hired by the University of Washington, and she's gonna move to UW next year. I get to have her for 1 more year, so that's great. So, talking about transitions, think about in your own life what a big transition is. You may seem, okay, moving out to go to college, or I don't know, getting married or having a kid. So all of those are aspects of the lived experience of these people that I was interested in. And one of the more salient features for me, these populations, is what are the consequences of them moving from relying on foraging to moving to rely on store-bought food, for example, or different patterns of activity during the day. And this is some of the things that we have been studying in the last 20 years. I'm going to be mentioning some of them today. Interested in the effects of the nutritional transition, the effect of the epidemiological transitions coming from areas where parasitic load is very high and we have different prevalences of infectious disease, to a situation where chronic diseases are starting to be very prevalent as well. Changes in activity patterns and in how men and women navigate fertility in this new situation. And finally, a very qualitative, mostly cultural approach to understanding how Qom people navigate the health system. So what do you do? What do you do when you feel sick? What is it that you do?
Google the symptoms.
Yeah, exactly.
You Google the symptoms, right? You go on the internet. And then
Go to the doctor.
you go to the doctor. Exactly. So we asked that to many people, and we discovered these therapeutic itineraries they go to when they move from their mostly shamanic healthcare system to being able to go to the Western biomedical health post or to the evangelical Bible healing. And it's a very interesting dynamics that's going on, and that's one of the things we are studying. And so I'm going to take you briefly to some of the things, the findings of our studies on the nutritional transition. What do you do when you go from basing your diet on honey and fish and fruits from the forest and game from the forest to basically living on torta frita for most of the month? Torta frita is fried dough. So that's the staple in these peri-urban communities. Usually they receive a subsidy at the beginning of the month, and they go to the supermarket and buy relatively expensive items that last for the first month, and then the rest of the month is mainly polenta, noodles, and torta frita. So that changed completely the type of food they are exposed to, the caloric intake, and the quality of the diet. This is the first result. I'm going to show you. This is a study we did comparing the nutritional status of Qom people in year 2000 with 2010, and compared to the Qom people in the remote area. So the darkest bar is the remote area. Most women were categorized as normal weight according to the WHO BMI, which has its own problems, but it's a way of organizing some of our data. And so we have that most of the Western women were categorized as normal, with some women being overweight and some obese. But as you can tell from comparing just 10 years, the same population, how the prevalence of normal body weight dropped and the prevalence of obesity increased. And this is just in 10 years. We are supposed to do another round in a couple of years, and my prediction is that we are going to have even more people categorized in the obese situation. This is almost identical for men. So we have an interesting case. In most populations, you see that women tend to be heavier than men. That's not the case for the Qom. And we started to analyze this from a biocultural or biosocial perspective. So it is easy to say, okay, it's just energy balance. They are eating too many calories and not spending too many calories. Okay, yeah, that's part of the answer. The other answer is that what are the obesogenic characteristics of the environment that takes them to that situation? And this picture is to remind me to tell you about a study we did a few years ago, and this is in the more remote areas where they are separated in small villages. Each village has one person, which is in all cases a man, who is the go-to person that interacts with the politicians, with the non-indigenous people. And we started noticing that all of them were chubby. And we decided to do a systematic study of that, and this is what we found. So we had, this is from the time we still call them Toba. So Qom men and Qom women, and we had a BMI distribution, and we found these outliers, and every single one of them was the chief of that village. So close association with socioeconomic status, not economic as much as social status. They were the most prestigious men that had access to market food in the village. And women were not as, there was more variation among the women. And again, this is a graph showing low, medium, and high status, and definitely the ones that are, and we constructed the socioeconomic status index by analyzing how many people they knew in town or in the non-indigenous situation. So again, all this is to illustrate what are the determinants or the covariates that shape the way the Qom are navigating in this new nutritional landscape. These are three sisters from the peri-urban community, and another important aspect we wanted to understand was what was their cultural understanding of a healthy body, what they thought it was a healthy body. And I was talking to Dan earlier today that the first interesting thing that happened to us is that we showed the scale, both men and women, and we would say, oh, so this is one of our participants, and we would say, Jose, which of these silhouettes do you think is the healthiest? What would represent the healthiest woman body? And he would go, I don't know. Ask them. And say, no, but this is not regarding who's most attractive or who you find is health. Who is healthy? I don't know. I said, okay, let's go to the men. And they were M5. They said they pointed to one without hesitation. We did the same with women, and women refused to answer the men part. So that was our first interesting understanding of this gendered situation. So we decided to drop the cross-gender thing, and we asked about same gender situation. And this is what we found. So for men, they chose mostly silhouettes in the normal weight category. But for women, it was mostly overweight. In a more ethnographic qualitative analysis, there was no difference between being overweight and being able to bear children. So fertility and body size came hand in hand. If you are big, you are strong, you can bear children. And that goes to their understanding of what health is all about for women. For men, it was not that clear. We're still trying to understand what's going on with men as well. So we have this situation in which we have an ever-increasing prevalence of overweight and obesity correlated with marginalization, poverty, social injustice, and obesogenic cultural understandings of health, plus some issues that have to do with how they interact with the non-indigenous sector. But it's also the possibility of metabolic programming, and we are very interested in trying to understand whether there are metabolic pathways that have been selected in these populations that either predispose them to certain chronic diseases or protect them. And this is something very interesting we found. So we did a study comparing postmenopausal women in the peri-urban Qom community with women matched in age in the city of Formosa, which most of them had European ancestry. And what we found is that the Toba women had biologically significant higher levels of adiponectin. For those of you, do you know what adiponectin is? No. Adiponectin is a hormone, it's relatively recently publicized. It's a hormone produced by fat cells, by adipocytes, that regulates energy, glucose metabolism. And the more adiponectin you have, the better you are at managing challenges in glucose management. So the more adiponectin you have, the less prevalence of diabetes you have in the population. So, and this is interesting because we measured C-peptide. C-peptide is the same as measuring insulin. It's part of the insulin, the pro-insulin molecule. So this basically is measuring blood insulin levels. You see that we may have a case of insulin resistance in the city women with European ancestry, but not in the Qom women. And considering the high prevalence of obesity, it is puzzling to find this kind of situation. The prevalence of diabetes is low relative to other populations. Take the Pima, for example, which have similar levels, similar prevalences of obesity, but the highest diabetes prevalences. So there's something going on, and we are trying to figure out metabolically where they have evolved this protective mechanism. Nevertheless, they are still vulnerable to the development of cardiovascular disease. We have all the bad signs that predispose them to that, and they do show high blood pressure. Not all of them, but they do that. And a third of the population has what the Western biomedical model indicates as metabolic syndrome. There's also another aspect, and I see and here that is interesting, how market integration and access to electricity change our activity patterns. And this is something that this area of research has been neglected in evolutionary anthropology and human biology studies. It's only in the last, 5 years that
Probably less than 5 years.
less than 5 years, that we started to pay attention to an activity we execute or not execute for a third of our lives. We spend a third of our lives sleeping. And these sleep activity patterns are where we don't know enough from an evolutionary perspective, from a human variation perspective. And this refers to a study we did a couple of years ago where we worked with a community without access to electricity and compared the activity patterns using accelerometers and sleep diaries and collecting saliva samples for melatonin content compared to the peri-urban, peri-town, it's not so urban, group that had access to electricity 24/7, and they were close relatives to the first group. What we found is that people living in the peri-urban setting slept 1 hour less than the other group. That's biologically quite significant. And I don't know if you notice that I keep saying biological significance. This is my current pet peeve. Coming back from the APAs, I was discouraged and frustrated with the reliance on p-values and statistical significance. And I'm trying to, wherever I go and I talk about my work, to make people aware that we need to start talking about what it all means. We need to go back to our roots and say, well, this is biologically significant, not statistical. So you will notice that I don't have p-values. It's not that p-values are not useful, but we need to remove ourselves from all this statistical juggling act and look at what it means biologically. Okay, that was an aside. I will have many asides. Okay, sleep patterns. And this is the study I mentioned about. I just got an email from Horacio de la Iglesia, who's our main chronobiologist collaborator, with a fun graph. Did I? No, I did not put it in the presentation. With activity patterns in nights with full moon compared with nights of new moon. Very interestingly, in the nights of full moon, they sleep 27 minutes less than in the nights with new moon. So it's an interesting situation of what is directing our activities in the past, what may have been the environmental things that entrained our activity patterns. And it's interesting that Eduardo is doing the same with owl monkeys. So it's looking at different activity patterns with moon and without moon. Eduardo Fernandez Duque, my husband, he came 2 years ago. Okay, so now I'm gonna take you to the second understanding of the word's transitions at the individual level throughout the life course. As you know, this is the typical graph you get of human life stages with more or less arbitrary points and more or less plastic timing of switching from one life stage to the next. Each arrow here represents a transition. I'm gonna be mostly talking about some transitions here, that I'm focusing on right now, but the idea of the overall project is to map out and have like a holistic understanding of the life course from many different angles. And the conceptual framework, I did my postdoc training with Peter Ellison, and so I come from the energy availability Ellisonian perspective. So my central focal point is proposing how energy availability is the variable that can explain variation or can explain these trade-offs we see in each nodal point in our life history, and how can we extract information that informs us about the variation in timing of life history transitions. Of course, what makes up our energy budget on a day-to-day basis is going to be constructed by many, many different variables: social, nutritional, structural, physical, that interact among themselves. Even epigenetic, that's something that we are incorporating right now, these transgenerational aspects that may shape different trajectories for metabolic management of energy. So this is the conceptual framework, just to give you an idea of what we are talking about. And today I'm gonna be focusing on 3 life history transitions: the transition from infancy to childhood, when babies are weaned from the breast; the transition that goes in girls during puberty, that goes from a non-reproductive to a reproductive stage, the beginning of reproductive life, and the end of reproductive life in the menopausal transition. So these are the 3 transitions we focused on in this longitudinal study that was funded by NSF, and we are working with this wealth of data we have that is fascinating but very challenging as well. So the first transition represents, from the point of view of life history, an interesting transition because babies have to manage to grow in a different way, to rely. They go from relying on breast milk, which is a very rich but homogeneous source of nutrition, to starting to incorporate not only food, but everything that comes with food. So there are changes in immune function, changes in metabolic management of calories, and changes in growth. So what we did is that we started with very young babies who were still exclusively breastfed. So you're not managing your food very well.
Failing in the cultural component.
So we followed these babies as they grew and as they weaned from the breast. We took anthropometric measurements, developmental milestone data, and health information from the main caretaker, which is usually the mom, but also cross-check with the local health center. And we did also ethnographic studies on what it means for the Qom to go through these transitions, and in particular, the infancy to childhood transition.
Can I ask a quick
Yes.
clarification? So how often were you doing these measurements?
Monthly. We have,
Your team or the?
yeah, so my team, and this is Rosaura, collecting information on the baby, monthly for 4 years. So we have a lot of data. And I'm working with a set of collaborators to digest all this. This is just a snapshot of what we are seeing. We are seeing that depending on the type of challenge, immune challenge, the children go through, that has a different effect on either linear growth or growth in mostly fat. Toba babies they have these very interesting growth trajectories. They are born very big. We have only 1% of low birth weight. They're born big and they go off the charts of the Argentinian standard curves. They are chubby babies. So let me show you this baby. How old do you think this baby is?
4 months.
5. 6. Who said 4? Wow. It looks a lot older, right? It's 4 months. They are big babies. And they tend to be short and chubby. But as they progress through childhood, they gain in linear growth and they lean out. So there's some interesting evolutionary thing going on that may be related to the quality and availability of weaning foods. So it seems to have some impact on this, I think it's a high pathogen load in the region, and it has a different effect on different growth trajectories. We're also interested from a biosocial and epidemiological perspective on the effect of the way they are born. Toba babies or Qom babies the population has a high prevalence of C-sections. 45% of births are through C-sections. And I can tell you for hours what's going on, and I'm very interested in that. So it presents with this very interesting opportunity to compare the growth and other effects and developmental effects of this perspective. And I am teaming up with Amanda Bailey and Karen Kramer, who collected very similar information from Maya boys and girls in this agricultural population. And she presented this poster in the last AAPAs looking at the nutritional condition of children as they grew in both groups, comparing C-section babies with vaginal-born babies, and they have very different growth trajectories. And there's a lot of interaction with gender, so baby boys seem to be more affected by the mode of birth. So interesting things going on. Okay, progressing through life, we get to the pubertal transition. We followed a group of girls from when they were 8, 9 years of age until they experienced their first menstrual period, and some of them for up to 6 months after that. And as we speak, we are following them up for every year to see what's going on. I just got a WhatsApp, because everybody uses WhatsApp now, from my field assistant saying, "You don't know how much they grew. They all have boyfriends now." And so, yeah, it's very interesting. So again, we follow them for 5 years. We collected not only anthropometric health and developmental data, but also urine samples. So we are now in the middle of grant writing, proposal writing, to get funding to analyze 2 freezers full of urine samples, so we have a lot of data. Melanie, right now, is working on trying to understand the dynamics of androgens during puberty in girls, which is a neglected area. We are finding very interesting dynamics in this population related to this interesting pattern. This is the typical human growth pattern you're familiar with deep deceleration in infancy, slow growth during childhood, pubertal dip, and then age of takeoff, and the pubertal growth spurt. This is the typical one. What we see in our population is that girls have an early pre-pubertal dip and an early pubertal growth spurt. So they seem to be on an accelerated track, which is also taken all the way down to menopause. They have earlier ages at menopause. So they seem to compress life history in a shorter span. So we are trying to understand endocrinologically what's going on, not only from ovarian hormones, but also metabolic and androgens.
Sorry.
Yes.
What are the 2 lines?
So, this is growth velocity. So this is how fast they grow.
No, I mean, is this boys versus girls?
No. This is the typical textbook
Versus
versus the total,
Okay.
showing an accelerated back. I should have said that, sorry. But we're also interested from a cultural perspective what the Qom think about this transition. The first thing is that they think it's a transition, and you will understand why I say that later. So they do think this is an important period where they are changing their role in society, and they think there is some effect of school and playing with boys that may have an effect on accelerating puberty and the age of menarche. They interpret menstrual blood as something strong, and the elderly women would say that girls should not look at the moon because the moon is a masculine mythical character that can promote menarche in girls. But from the point of view of girls, it is very interesting. This quote encapsulates the sentiment of the majority of the kids. It says, my mom says, my life has changed, I'm no longer a girl, but I want to keep playing. They don't like it when they get their first menstruation because they have to start washing their own clothes, and they are not allowed to play outside with boys anymore, so they don't like the idea of this transition. Finally, the end of reproductive life, there's a lot in between, and I have done some work on the in-between transitions, but I'm going to tell you a little more about the menopausal transition now. This is Isabelina, which is my friend. He's exactly my age, and she also has 3 boys and 5 girls or something like that. But she also has 3 boys like me, and 2 of them are named like my boys, so we have a lot in common. And I appreciate her friendship and her wisdom in interpreting a lot of the things we are studying. One of the, well, I'll tell you about that later. So this is the study I was referring to when we compared the European ancestry city women with the Qom women. They were matched by age in general. Of course, they have different lifestyles. They are mostly women with secondary and post-secondary education that work outside the home, and the Qom women who had primary education, or some of them some secondary education, and they mostly have household activities. However, they were matched in the age of menarche, So they got their first menstruation around 13 years of age. The first big difference is in the age of menopause, we have a considerable difference, which from an evolutionary perspective, it makes a big impact on reproductive span. In terms of anthropometrics, they're more or less the same, tending to be overweight, and the prevalence of overweight and obesity was relatively high. Now, going to the symptoms, you are all very familiar with our Western understanding of menopause, and then we were saying about the medicalization of menopause in our society. Vasomotor symptoms are present in both the non-indigenous and the Qom women, with lessened magnitude among the Qom, and some symptoms being more prevalent than others in different ways. The cultural meaning was fascinating to me. The Western women, the city women, it was all about menopause and looking for magazines, about having more information. I don't know enough about it. I heard this in the TV about what the supplements I can take and hormonal replacement. So they were very much into the whole idea of the medicalization of menopause. Toba women, zip. They don't even have a term to refer to menopause in their language. Menopause is non-existent. So here I am, writing my NSF grant, very important transitions in the life of a woman, universal. The Qom said, "Meno what?" And I said, "Well, what happens when you stop menstruating?" They look at me. "Stop menstruating." "Yeah, but you don't see changes." I thought I was pregnant, but no. And then I was relieved that I cannot have babies anymore, so I can raise my last child or play with my grandchildren. Nothing. I said, well, and then they started to say, I'm tired, or I'm sad. And I was very worried that we were introducing this thing to them, this medical understanding of menopause. But it was super reassuring to find out that it helped them normalize their experience, because they were feeling all that and they were anxious about cancer. They said, "I thought I had cancer," or "I thought I was sick." But you say all women go through this? That was going on in other parts of the world. And so I think I have that meno thing. So it was super reassuring. That's the word, that even though we were introducing something conceptually new to them, we were also providing and normalizing discourse to them. But the topic is so rich, and the cultural anthropologists have done, like Margaret Locke and colleagues have done a lot of work on this, but it's a very rich area for research. Going to the physiological aspects of it, not surprisingly, we found lower levels of ovarian hormones in the Qom compared to the city women. We see that, of course, they go through a big drop after menopause in levels of progesterone, but the drop is much larger in city women, which I think it's part of the explanation why the symptoms are felt much more prominently in the Western women. So, what are our future directions? Well, to digest all we have so far and to keep adding pieces to this life course perspective and understanding the biosocial, endocrine, and psychological aspects of these transitions in life. Thank my my collaborators and sponsors, and I'm not gonna show you sunset, but a very colorful picture of the Qom dance. They participate in evangelical cult celebrations, and it's very powerful. So I leave you with that image, and thank you. Yeah.
So you mentioned, excuse me, fascinating material. You mentioned in our earlier discussion that this is a very sexually dimorphic population. So I'm curious how the growth curves of the males compare to the normative Western
Yeah.
trajectories.
So unfortunately, we don't have longitudinal data for boys, but our cross-sectional data indicate that they keep growing longer than other populations. So there's an extended period of growth, and they ended up being very tall.
And do you think that this is not some artifact of acculturation and modernity? but
No,
this
no, no,
level-
no. This has been, I got hold of anthropometric information from the early 1900s, where some crazy guy took their method, and you still you still see the sexual dimorphism right there.
So do you think early menarche relative to
Yeah.
urban populations is sort of also historically normal for this population?
I'm very hesitant to give an answer to that, because in the narratives, they are not terribly surprised by an 11-year-old girl getting their first menstruation. So it is quite normal for them to have young girls. And you see that in other South American lowland indigenous, like the Pume of Venezuela, they also have it very early. So I think it's a combination of girls getting their first menstruation and stopping growing earlier, and the boys growing for longer. So it's a combination of both strategies.
And do you see a connection between that and the high birth weight?
We have with Marta, my former postdoc, we have argued that is a way of funding the accelerated growth trajectory later on. So they put a lot of fat, and with that, it's like a bank account that they draw from to have this speed growth. Yeah.
So I'm wondering about aging women for menopause. So do you find that the period of lactational amenorrhea after the last birth just kind of blends into menopause?
Yes,
And so
definitely.
how do you date menopause in those cases?
Fortunately we have hormonal. We're gonna have hormonal data to test for that. We recruited women in their early 40s because we knew that they had an early age of menopause. So we're gonna see what the hormones say, and we are planning to assay for anti-Mullerian hormone to see whether ovarian reserve can be detected.
Do most people continue breastfeeding until they're pregnant with their next baby?
Yes. Yeah. Or until the child is now 4 said, no, I'm not
Yeah,
interested.
okay, so they'll be breastfeeding two babies at
Yes.
the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, and they also tandem breastfeed nieces and nephews. And,
Wow. Thank you. Could you go back to the slide that presented the Ellisonian theoretical? Okay. So I'm just curious about the difference between that sort of model in which pretty much all of the causality into the trade-off, into the life history trade-offs
Yeah.
comes from energy availability.
Yeah.
That there's nothing in there about extrinsic mortality. And so if you
Yes.
could just comment on that.
That's one weakness of the model. In the case of the Qom population, my own personal view is that this accelerated pattern of growth has been shaped by extrinsic mortality. So, but in a way that shapes, maybe prenatally, the programming of energy use and energy management. It's half-baked, but it's something to think about that hopefully will generate hypotheses and predictions that we can test.
Thanks.
How much of non-milk foods do you think are responsible for getting those really big 4-month-old babies?
Exclusive breast milk. Exclusive.
Please.
Nothing. Yeah.
I saw a San baby that was 3 months old that weighed 6 pounds.
Oh no, these babies are sumo players. They are big. They are big and short. So it's a very interesting phenomenon that I think deserves to be understood, which resembles very much what goes on in Samoa. You know that Samoa has this high prevalence of overweight and obesity, and one of my graduate students, Kendall Arslanian, is just flying to Samoa next week, and her research project is going to be on the prenatal and early postnatal development of fat deposition in babies. So I'm very excited to have her working on that and maybe compare that with the Qom babies.
At what age roughly do they tend to transition to eating solid food?
If you go to the more remote areas, they don't start until they are 10, 11 months of age. Later. But they still have, they are still big. In the peri-urban one, because of their exposure to the Western biomedical model, they are advised to start when they are between 4 and 6 months of age. So their first complementary food is Cheetos. Exactly. It's tasty. They think, oh, this is great. It's light and tasty and it's the best transition food.
You talk about the C-sections.
Yes.
So was there a high maternal mortality rate or just infant mortality rate before C-sections? That
No.
seems hard to fit into the picture.
It is mostly the doctor's liability thing,
Oh,
convenience.
so not essential C-section.
Not essential, they are programmed,
Oh.
and I'm enraged. And of course, they don't care about any, say, no, I don't want to deal with long labor, it's easier, cleaner.
Ooh, okay.
So, yeah. Very dire situation.
But it's not because baby's too big to deliver and would create
No.
a threat to the mother.
It doesn't seem to be because they are programmed. I go visit pregnant women and say, oh yeah, I'm gonna have my baby in May 25th.
Oh.
How do you know? Oh, because the doctor is gonna go for a C-section. And they're not very happy about it. They say, why? Well, the doctor thinks it's better. And of course, they don't do VBACs, vaginal delivery after C-section. So once a 15-year-old young woman has her first baby, all the other babies are C-section.
Now, from my early reading in this area, I was under the impression that hunter-gatherer women took longer to develop and reached menarche like even as late as 18.
Absolutely.
So is this unusual or?
I think this is unusual. And for lowland South American groups, this is kind of an outlier, except for the Pume of Venezuela that seems to be on the same trajectory. But there's something interesting going on here that, as Joe mentioned, may be related to extrinsic mortality.
How ecologically rich is the environment for the foragers? Is it pretty abundant in terms of resources?
It used to be very abundant. Chaco in Quechua means hunting ground. So it used to be very, very abundant. Now things are changing, but they still have their armadillos and wild deer and rabbits and fish. They rely a lot on fishing and highly caloric fruits from the forest. And 17 different types of honey, which is amazing. Yeah.
So are women on a faster life history trajectory than the boys, or just compared to other women? And how are the boys compared to boys?
That's a very interesting question that reflects my bias and also the gendered quality of this group. The men in the community have asked me when are you gonna work with us? When we have interesting stuff too. I know, but we have not been very successful in, for example, teenage boys. This is a universal thing. They are so difficult to work with. I raised 3 boys, so I know, and I have a teenager right now at home. So we have not paid a lot of attention to the world of men. So that's, if any of you would like to work with men, and I'm not sure whether we will have the same kind of situation. Cross-sectionally, they seem to, again, as I told Dan, to grow for longer. Like in their early 20s, they still seem to be growing. Yeah.
One more question. Have you looked at the macronutrient profiles of the changes in the diet?
Yes. We have published a paper together with my graduate student, Elena Lagranja, who's a nutritionist in Argentina. We have a comparison of macronutrients, and the shift in fat content is the most salient one, and there is a significant decrease in protein too.
Decrease in protein? Or
Decrease.
Yeah.
So the traditionally living Qom have a high protein, low fat diet compared to the torta frita families.
I should probably know this because I think we're co-authors on this paper. What's the breast milk composition like compared to these other groups? Like, is there more fat in the breast milk? Has she done that yet?
I don't remember.
That makes me feel so much better.
This is a work done by Alicia Reiki, who did her doctoral dissertation analyzing. But she analyzed most the immune components of breast milk.
Yeah, and then they were looking at, and then this other paper looks at mineral composition, but it seems like
that's Laura Klein.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the fat.
I don't remember.
Yeah. Okay. Just because these really fat things would be really interesting to know.
That'd be super interesting.
So, I know that you said earlier that sort of historically their resources were quite abundant. If we assume that the sort of high degree of sexual dimorphism, fat babies, and preference for fat women in terms of health status is not some feature of modernity, but that all of that is a stable feature in their long-standing ecosystem, then just based on that, the statement that historically they had high resource abundance is surprising, because you might expect that the combination of a preference for high fat content in adult female body composition and the fat babies and presumably very rich milk, which is probably what's juicing up those babies to make them fat like that, that's a constellation, and that's a constellation that buffers against episodic resource scarcity. So I wonder if there are historical records or climate records or something that you can go to that would reveal whether, so
Yeah.
you made the comparison case with Samoa, right?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I mean, Samoa and other similar systems in that region all historically suffer from, episodic scarcity when you get big storms that come and destroy gardens and knock down coconuts and
Yeah.
disrupt the ecosystem. And there are lean times where, for women to be buffered against that allows them to keep reproducing, and presumably for babies to be efficient in having stores and being able to convert energy is going to be efficient as well. So I wonder if you can go and look backwards.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I still have to connect the dots. The Gran Chaco region is a relatively young region. It used to be a big salty lake 5,000 years ago. So it's very young. So they migrated to this environment relatively recently, and we don't know from where. Their oral history indicates they have terms for snow, which is in this region definitely never snows. So there's some indications that they may have come from the south or from the Andes. So I don't know whether that can be related to this. We know that this is a highly seasonal environment. And we know that there are seasonal patterns of fecundity. So women tend to get pregnant in the plentiful season. And so therefore we have birth seasonality there. And so they respond to these changes. But historically, that may give us clues about their evolutionary history. That'd be something to think about, and I thank you for suggesting. It'd be interesting to look for booms and busts, right? To see whether we can explain some of the strategy to put on weight.
You showed quite a bit of variability in weight for women.
Yeah.
And did that correlate with puberty or interbirth interval or anything
Not
like that?
really. And
Infant weight?
our studies on the return to postpartum fertility indicate that it's not the nutritional status per se what is important, but the change, the gain of weight over several months
Mhm.
that tells the brain, oh, things are improving.
Mhm.
I should get my ovaries
Mhm.
going again.
Okay.
You had a really interesting, I think, ethnographic story about girls going through puberty. How generalizable do you think that is? That the impression that I got was that when a young person is going through puberty, if they're a boy, it's like, great, I can now do all sorts of things, whatever I feel like doing, and for girls it's like, great, now I have to do all of this crap.
Yeah.
Does that seem like a fair
Yeah.
characterization?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. They definitely don't want to grow up. They don't want to become, but
But that's girl
after-
specific.
It's girl specific. Well, I think it's girl specific because we haven't discussed this with boys enough. But I think that's the case. And it's like they go through that period when, during the first few months, but now that we're doing the annual follow-ups, they are really happy to feel that they can reproduce. So they feel proud. And some of them say, I want a baby like my older sister, and they get pregnant at 13. Just because they want a baby of their own.
I think it's a common pattern where adolescent girls assume adult responsibilities much sooner than adolescent boys. And adolescent boys are kind of layabouts, and that I seem to recall from some ethnography that in Jutwatsi they're described as the masters of the shade, right? They just sit around.
Didn't they say that about Maasai boys?
I have one at home.
My daughter was very hardworking.
It's the daughter. I have 3 boys, so yeah.
It's just what makes it interesting is that it does seem to be so generalizable to so many different populations, maybe as some kind of link to the day-to-day schedule of work as an adult for men versus women, because women have to work all day every day and men for hunting once in a while when they feel like it can go, otherwise are the masters of the shade.
And by virtue of the fact that female reproductive value is on a different schedule than male reproductive value, so that women, adolescent women begin their reproductive careers earlier than adolescent men who have very little to offer to a partner. And so they assume adult roles earlier by virtue of their reproductive value, and society recognizes that, and so the expectations are different accordingly.
Right, the second part of your story was also interesting, how it's so unpleasant until you have something to contribute and you get some kind of social status out of that.
Yeah.
Thank you for such an interesting talk. I was wondering if you could share if there's any information about the growth or adiposity trajectories that result in these high rates of obesity and stuff, and it seems consistent with what you were saying about these, prenatal and postnatal adiposity patterns would imply that this is a population that's inherently more susceptible to obesogenic exposures because of their high number of pre-adipocytes that they're probably born with.
Yeah, but at the same time you have the thing with adiponectin, so they may be that during their evolutionary history they developed this ability to put on weight. But at the same time, they are very muscular.
Mm-hmm.
They are formidable people, and this has been described as such in the early, when the Spanish colonizers first encountered them, they were described as these formidable, healthy specimens, and they are rugby players. In Argentina, that is all about soccer. They don't play soccer, they play rugby. And it's not only fat, but there's muscle mass that may be more obvious in men than women, but still they are big people.
So can I ask a follow-up then with the infants? It sounds like there's some sort of potential trade-off, assuming they don't have just like oodles of energy available, and that's why they're so fat. That there's some trade-off between maybe skeletal and adipose deposition. And so are you sort of saying that the skeletal sparing continues, that there are sort of short-stature people in general?
No.
No, okay,
No,
so they're
so
just everything.
It's
Muscle fat
interesting
and
because
skeletal.
that reminds me of another pet peeve of mine, which is the word stunting. So we hear, this population has a lot of stunted kids. And if you look at that, for the first few years, they look stunted, but it doesn't make sense to describe them as stunted because they end up being as tall as I am. And for the South American indigenous population, they are outliers. They're very tall. So they have a different growth tempo. So they remain short and fat for a while, and they take off. And they become tall people. So they are different. We need to come to terms with this population variability in growth trajectories. We cannot normalize everything as we are taught in the medical school, right?
So has nobody done, nobody's done genetics to try to see where they're
No. Yeah.
It seems like a mystery waiting to be
I know.
answered.
I know. Yeah, genetics. Yeah, well, it's a sensitive issue.
Yeah.
For there were some attempts to work with some genetic variants that they took blood samples and they left and never came back. So I am very sensitive to that. I never propose to them, give me your samples to test for genetics. I don't do genetics, but it's a personal thing. Unless I can explain to them exactly what it means and how we will benefit from that. It's not that it's inherently wrong, but in this particular population, there's a history of that. Yeah.
How has the prevalence of cesareans affected like the population? Because you can only have so many cesareans as a...
Apparently not. They have nine kids and they...
All cesarean? Because I've always thought that you can only have like...
I think the cesarean thing started maybe 10 years ago.
Okay. So you don't see it yet?
Not yet. And there are definitely stories of women get their tubes tied unknowingly. So say, oh no, she has 6 kids, she doesn't need any more. Yeah.
I was wondering if you've collected any qualitative data about stressors or perhaps even cortisol levels, because they might be inputs into the life history, trade-offs. So
Yes.
how do they compare to the stressors in
We are measuring cortisol in urine samples is in the plans, but I take cortisol as a metabolic gatekeeper, not as a stress hormone. So in order for us to measure stress, we would have to design a different study, I think. And we have qualitative data on stressors. For adult women, I don't know about men, it's food security, and it's concern about the health of the children. And the third one is about their health. So those are the main. The question was, what worries you the most? And they say, not having enough to eat, my children getting sick, and my own health. Those are the 3 main things that they mentioned.
Seems like the answer would explain a lot of the variation in obesity.
Yeah, right. So, Dorsa Amir, who's a doctoral student in our program, is doing a study looking at in different populations, the Shuar, India, Poland, and in Argentina, looking at time preference, and they're definitely an immediate return type of society. They have a million anecdotes about how they prefer things now. So we're collecting all this information on a monthly basis, and every time we go, we just give them a token of appreciation. I don't know, a set of plastic cups or a bowl or something like that. And one of the field assistants said, what if we save 4 months and we make a larger token? And I said, well, that's a good idea. They could get a nice jacket or something. We would go and say, well, what do you prefer? Wait for 4 months and get a bicycle, or, oh, no, you give me something now. None of the 70 plus women prefer the delayed return. So it's fascinating.
They know you well enough now to know that you're going
I've been working with them for 20 years and they know I will deliver, but
shows you how
It's the time
inbuilt it
preference,
is,
it's just
yeah.
that time preference, yeah. It's or the guy who was helping us with some logistics. He's a Qom young person. Say, oh, I'm so happy because I've been offered this position with the government, and the position with the provincial government is for life. There's nothing can just take it away from you, and so I'm gonna get, let's say, $300 a month for a lifetime, but I don't know what to do because this other guy offered me $1,000 a month for 3 months. And say, here you go, have you made the numbers? But it's $1,000. I say, but you have, this is safe. You, in Argentina we say atar la vaca, you're tying the cow. And say, oh yeah, you're right. The next day I see that he refused the government.
I'm gonna, in the hopes of pushing you to explore this possibility further, I'm gonna perseverate on the idea of, severe episodic resource scarcity. And I mean, it's fascinating that they have an indigenous term for snow, right?
Yeah.
Given how much you are blending the ethnographic and the biomedical examination of their lives, I would encourage you to explore, since you said, women explicitly say having enough food is one of their principal concerns, how sort of richly cognized that cultural model is, right? Whether there's a rich lexicon for talking about famine, for talking about lean times, right? Because although, they may, ecologically it may well be that the region was quite rich, and they may have a kind of rose-colored glasses view of the past when there were lots of animals before firearms came and all that kind of thing. If they have, what are not Spanish loanwords or whatever, but are long-standing indigenous terms for famine and for, starvation foods, for example, right? So, I mean, the people that I worked with in Sumatra, they had, classes of foods, right? And there were things that, that no ordinary human being would ever want to eat, but that people knew you could eat that if that's all there was, right?
Super interesting.
And that, you can think of that as a cultural legacy of a time before there was, a local shop, basically, with canned tuna.
I have this colleague in Argentina who's an ethnobotanist. I bet he would definitely know something about that. Thank you. Fantastic.
Do you have any information on infant behavior?
Development?
Yeah, or fussing, crying behavior?
Yes, we collected that. And an interesting developmental difference is that babies don't crawl.
Really? Well, they did, same thing.
They
One of
don't
David
crawl.
Tracy's students said that.
Because of the,
They
too
sit.
fat?
No, they're always up in arms. Everybody's holding them, and they go from sitting by themselves to standing and walking. They never crawl. I never seen in the 20 years working with them a baby crawling.
Now, I noticed in your pictures, though, I didn't see any babies strapped onto women's
What,
bodies.
this is the peri-urban population. They don't have slings, but in the traditionally living one, they have slings. Yeah, and they are hip carriers. Yeah. Thank you. It's been a great audience.